Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Odell, and I am with the Center for Faith and Opportunity Initiatives at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or what we like to call the Partnership Center. We're delighted that you all have joined us today for the third webinar in a webinar series that we've started on mental illness. This third webinar focuses on understanding eating disorders and what faith and community leaders can learn to help individuals struggling with these disorders. But first, a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This is an educational webinar, which is off the record and not intended for press purposes. If you're a member of the press, we will be happy to connect you with our press office here at HHS after the program. If you're having difficulty hearing us clearly, you may find it helpful to call into the number that is provided through the webinar system. We found that sometimes that audio quality can be a little better. You may also note that the audio quality that you're receiving is dependent upon the internet connection that you have. So you may want to check your internet connection to make sure that you have as high quality audio as possible. Lastly, we'll be sending a link of the recording of today's webinar as a follow-up, as well as a link to the PowerPoint slides. And so if you have any questions about that, be sure to check the follow-up webinar that we send that should have that downloadable link. And so you'll be able to get that information from us through that email if you have any challenges with that. Or if you have any follow-up questions, you can always email us at partnerships, that's partnerships with an S, at H as in health, H as in human, S as in service.gov. That's partnerships at hhs.gov. And finally, we have a full program today, and we'll try and get to as many questions as we can at the end. And we're eager to hear your engagement. So as a part of this time, what we encourage you to do is jump over to the question and answer, and in the form where you would enter a question, tell us what city and state you're from. How many people are joining us here from all across the country? Over in the question and answer, just type in your city and state that you're from. You can also use the chat feature. So I'm seeing Maryland, New York, Oklahoma, North Carolina, Texas, California, West Virginia, Puerto Rico, New Hampshire, Oregon, Illinois, Washington State. So we really do have people from across the country represented on the webinar today, and we're so excited that you're here joining us as a part of this time. With 1 in 5 people experiencing some form of mental illness each year, faith and community leaders are likely to engage individuals with mental health issues. In fact, research indicates that many individuals turn to a faith leader to address mental health challenges before they turn to a mental health professional. That's why we in the Partnership Center launched this series of webinars to educate, equip, and engage communities on what is often an unspoken epidemic. We've hosted previous webinars on co-occurring disorders as well as anxiety disorders, and you can find those on our YouTube channel that we'll post a link to in the chat feature here shortly as our presenters get started. But today, our attention turns to a specific set of mental health disorders in the form of eating disorders. As a part of preparing this webinar, I learned that eating disorders have one of the highest rates of death or morbidity for those with mental health disorders. It's only surpassed by the increasing number of overdose deaths that we're experiencing as a result of the opioid crisis. This is a challenge that can be deadly for many. Increasing our awareness of these challenges of eating disorders, as well as considering how we can walk alongside those individuals in recovery, means that we can make a significant difference in the lives of those affected in our community. And to help us consider what we need to know and what we can do, we're joined on this webinar today by 2 wonderful presenters who are going to help us understand this topic, Dr. Margaret Naguib and Kristen Dondero-Betway. And I want to do a quick introduction for both of those before we turn the presentation over to them. Dr. Margaret Naguib is a clinical psychologist and a personal and spiritual development coach specializing in Christian counseling, inner healing, trauma, eating, and mood disorders. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, and has been working in the field of psychology since 1998. She travels around the country and internationally, providing seminars for various organizations and faith communities on wholeness and training, as well as training professionals. She's the author of multiple books, and she has a private practice in Wheaton, Illinois. Christy, our other presenter, serves as the Executive Director for Rock Recovery, a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit that helps people overcome disordered eating by combining clinical, spiritual, and community care. Having gone through the recovery from an eating disorder herself, she understands the depth of emotional, psychological, physical, and spiritual support needed to recover, and is passionate about spreading the message that freedom is possible. She's an active speaker and enjoys sharing her story with organizations and faith communities across the United States. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, Ryan, who serves as an ordained pastor in the Anglican Church of North America. So without further delay, let me turn this presentation over to these two wonderful presenters, Christy and Margaret. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thank you, Ben, for that great introduction. We're so excited to be here today and really grateful that you all have taken the time out of your very busy schedules to come learn and come explore this topic together. A lot of times eating disorders are really misunderstood and certainly not a part of our daily conversations. And it's a really important conversation to have. So I don't have any fancy letters behind my name like Dr. Naguib, but I do have a story. So I'll be sharing a little bit about my personal recovery and the stories of people that we work with at Rock Recovery every day and their incredible journeys as well. And one thing I really want to encourage you all about is no matter where you are in the community, what faith tradition you're a part of, where you work, where you live, you do have some power and some ability to help people who are struggling with mental illness and eating disorders. And my story of recovery actually started kind of by accident. I stumbled across a church in North Carolina who was running a course on eating disorders, completely oblivious that I had a problem. But that was the next step that I took, and that's what started my recovery after struggling with an eating disorder for 10 years. So we in the community are really able to help engage people and equip them and move them on path to fullness and wholeness. So today, we hope you can equip you with those different tools you might need. We'll discuss some basic clinical information about what are eating disorders, how they develop, symptoms to look for, some barriers people experience and as they try to access care, and then how faith and community leaders can effectively engage to help people who might be struggling with disordered eating. And we'll, of course, like Ben said, leave some time at the end for questions as well. So we'll start off today with what are eating disorders?
Thank you. Nice to be with you all today. I've been in the area of eating disorders since 98, and it's been such a joy to come alongside women and men who struggle with eating disorders.
Dr. Naguib,
yes.
This is Ben. Can you make sure your volume's up on your microphone again real quick? We can't hear you very well.
Yeah. Okay, it should be good. How's that?
Much better. Go ahead. Go ahead and start again. We couldn't hear you before.
Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to join you on this and to talk about this topic that both Christy and I are passionate about, mental health, but then also eating disorders. And I'm going to start off by just sharing what is an eating disorder. There can be some confusion about that. And I think the most important thing to understand is that there's really a continuum. So there's full-blown eating disorder, but on the other end is this idea of, healthy eating, and then somewhere in the middle is what we call disordered eating. And you can see from that slide, healthy eating is eating a variety of foods, eating regularly, not restricting. And then as we move down that continuum, the symptoms kind of increase, and it can start as simple as having weight and shape preoccupation, dieting, excessive exercising, and then the intensity of those symptoms increases to, it could involve laxative abuse, a distorted body image that is very much out of reality for the person, although they might, see themselves as twice what they really are. And then all the way to the other end to anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. So I share this slide with you to show you that in reality, we could all struggle with some disordered eating at times. And it's important to be aware of that and to understand kind of what's underneath that disordered eating. But eating disorders are mental illnesses. And so there is a difference between disordered eating and an eating disorder. So moving to the next slide. There we have kind of the major diagnostic criteria. And I'm just going to give you the basics. You don't need to know the ins and outs of diagnosis, but it's helpful to understand kind of the general principle behind each disorder. And really, this is just to help raise awareness for you and to help you raise awareness with those that you serve and work with. So the first one is anorexia nervosa, and that's characterized by excessive weight loss due to eating very low calories in the day. So we're talking about excessive restriction. We're talking about fasting to excess, to the point where weight loss is the person's much beyond what they should be for their normal weight. And they struggle with that because they see themselves as, they can't see their body the way that it really is, and they think that they are larger than they really are. And so they feel this intense pressure and anxiety around food. And they deal with that anxiety by keeping their weight down and really avoiding food as much as possible. Bulimia nervosa can include restriction, but it also includes episodes of binge eating to excess. So eating large amounts of food in a small period of time. This is not just, after Thanksgiving when you've eaten a lot and you're full. This is a regular pattern of binge eating and then compensating. So oftentimes they feel very shameful after eating these large amounts of food. And so using things like purging or over-exercise or laxatives in order to cope with the excessive calories. And so you really need both of those. They go together for bulimia nervosa. And then finally, there's binge eating disorder. And that's when the person struggles with overeating and binge eating, but they don't necessarily use exercise or purging or any other type of behavior to compensate for the calories that they've ingested. Once again, there is, a continuum of disordered eating. So oftentimes we see someone, we diagnose them, and they seem to, there's definitely a significant pattern, and it negatively affects their functioning. And so we might say that they might have a, eating disorder not otherwise specified, and that covers people that might not exactly fit criteria, but this is certainly affecting their lives, and they need treatment.
Okay, so this is a lot of information on one slide. I promise I won't read it all to you, but we do want to give you some basic statistics and information about eating disorders. And a lot of the research, unfortunately, eating disorder research is vastly underfunded. So this is the best that we have. So bear with us for some of this information. But one of the stats we often use is that 30 million Americans will have an eating disorder at some point in their lifetime. That breakdown can be about 20 million women and 10 million men. And like Ben mentioned at the beginning, eating disorders are deadly, and anorexia nervosa has one of the highest mortality rates of any mental illness, especially for young adults as well. And while you might not actually be aware that binge eating disorder is in fact an eating disorder, it's the most prevalent and the most common eating disorder. And it's estimated that about 3.5% of women and 2% of men can be diagnosed with binge eating disorder or BED. And really, like Margaret was saying earlier in the presentation, excuse me, Dr. Naguib, I knew I was going to slip up. She was saying earlier in the presentation that you don't have to necessarily have this full-fledged clinically diagnosable eating disorder to have a problem with food or weight or things that interfere with life and daily happiness. And in a study that Self Magazine did a handful of years ago, they kind of polled their usual reader to see what's your life like, what's your food like, what's your relationship with food like. And across women ages 25 to 45, 31% said that they purge, 37% regularly skip meals to lose weight, and 39% have concerns regarding eating or body image that interfere with their daily happiness. So even if we don't fit all these diagnostic criteria, there can still be so many things happening with food and weight that are really getting in the way of our well-being spiritually, emotionally, and physically. So how do eating disorders develop? Dr. Naguib? You're still on mute.
I'll get this down.
It's hard.
We also make sure my microphone is good. Okay. So it's often hard for loved ones of someone struggling with an eating disorder to understand, especially when you explain to them the symptoms and signs of an eating disorder. Why would you want to starve yourself? Why would you want to throw up? And it's important that people know, number one, there is no one cause. eating disorders are complex disorders, and there's multiple things that go into someone having an eating disorder. Genetics does play a role. There is heritability with eating disorders. So you're 7 to 12 times more likely to have an eating disorder if someone in your family has had one. It doesn't mean you're doomed to have an eating disorder, but we do have genetic links. There are certain genotypes that we have discovered and explored with individuals who struggle with eating disorders, and much of it has to do with temperament. So people who struggle with perfectionism, obsessive thinking, rigidity in their thinking, people with eating disorders often have a fear of punishment or harm. They're more sensitive to that. They struggle sometimes, they struggle with managing their emotions. So all of those are temperaments that we have associated with eating disorders that make people maybe more susceptible. The biology of semi-starvation. So this is really interesting research that is so helpful for all of us, and it's part of the reason why dieting can be so destructive, not to just someone with an eating disorder, but even to your average person. When we restrict our calories, our body goes into semi-starvation mode. And a lot of the obsessive thinking that happens with eating disorders happens for anyone. If you've ever tried fasting or not eating for a day, you know what it's like. You start obsessing about food. And so anyone who puts themselves in a semi-starvation state can start a cycle of eating disordered thoughts and behaviors. We have experienced this idea that trauma is also associated with eating disorders. About 50% of people with eating disorders report some kind of trauma in their background. There's not necessarily a causality that if you've had trauma, you will necessarily have an eating disorder, but it's part of the eating disorder work to identify and see if someone has had trauma, and if maybe that's part of the underlying issue that has been perpetuating their eating disorder. Coping skills deficits. This is really around emotional regulation. So we always say in the eating disorder world, it's not what you're eating, but what's eating you. And another reason why someone may engage in eating disorder behaviors is because it helps them cope with emotions or situations that they really don't have the skills to cope with. And so starvation numbs feelings. Overeating can also numb feelings. And so much of the work that we do with people with eating disorders is to help give them the coping skills they need, especially in terms of relationships, interpersonal dynamics, how they relate to people, and how they relate to themselves. And then finally, sociocultural ideals and dieting. We live in a society, we live in a culture where thinness, or for men, it might be a little different. It might not necessarily be thinness, but we have these ideals about what is beautiful and what is acceptable. And it affects us, whether we realize it or not. And for someone with an eating disorder, they tend to be really scrupulous and want to be excellent in many ways. And so often the times they take on these sociocultural ideals and they take it really personally and feel this need to live up to these ideals. And so therein lies the beginning of an eating disorder, which often starts with dieting. We talk about dieting as being the gateway to eating disorders. And it can start off really innocent, wanting to lose 5 pounds. But for someone with an eating disorder where there might be that genetic risk or other risks involved, that can easily and quickly spiral into not just disordered eating, but an actual eating disorder. So all of these come together for someone, and part of treatment is identifying, the unique things that have contributed to the individual's eating disorder and helping them with that.
Absolutely. So just to shed a little more light on body dissatisfaction and dieting and how it can really contribute to disordered eating and eating disorders, here are some statistics here about children and adolescents. And while anyone of any age can have an eating disorder, a lot of these sort of markers can start to develop really early for people. So 42% of first through third graders want to be thinner, and 81% of 10-year-olds are afraid of being fat. This is a really sobering statistic. You'd think that kids should just be afraid of the monster under their bed or other things that might happen, but an actual fear of being fat by age 10 is really alarming. And what happens when people are afraid of being fat or want to be thinner, our society recommends dieting and says this is the answer, this is the solution. So almost half of 9 to 11-year-olds, 46%, are sometimes or very often on diets. And a lot of that's because the families they live in and the society they're around. So 82% of these families are sometimes or very often on diets as well. And the real problem with dieting is it causes us to think of external cues, not internal cues. So it takes us away from being able to care for our bodies, listen to them, know when they're hungry, stop when they're full. And it makes us kind of have a life dictated by numbers, calories, counting. And it can make people really afraid of food and want to feel completely in control. You know, a lot of the clients that we serve are scared of being hungry because they're not sure if they're going to be allowed to eat that day because of the rules they've set up and the diet they might be on. So it can be really damaging for people. And one of the problems is that a lot of these young kids eventually engage in dangerous and risky behaviors. And a lot of the people who are engaging in these behaviors are people who might be a little bit overweight or in larger bodies. And our society really idolizes thinness and really does not appreciate bodies that are larger. And so because of this pressure, even the medical community is putting a lot of pressure on BMI and weights and often recommends diets when they don't work. A multi-billion-dollar industry, and people wind up in the long term regaining the weight more often than not, and then some. And one of the most alarming things about dieting is that 35% of people who go on diets progress to pathological dieting. So they're often or always on a diet. And of this population, a quarter of people, 25%, will then progress to a full-blown eating disorder. So often we hear our clients come in and say, you know, I just wanted to lose a few pounds. It was spring break or I had a wedding, and it often takes them into a place they didn't need to go because of the markers and things that Dr. Naguib mentioned.
Okay, so we're going to begin about kind of a holistic approach to understanding of eating disorders. And I wanted to include this slide, especially as we are talking to faith leaders, and we're going to be talking about spirituality and eating disorders. And this really comes from my faith tradition of seeing the whole person as body, soul, and spirit. And so when I talk to my clients and we want to address every aspect of them. And what I love about this webinar is because we're talking with faith leaders, you are so vital to addressing the spiritual aspects and helping them in their spiritual growth and recovery. And so, you know, your body, that's easy to understand, our 5 senses, our organs, everything about us. And it's really this beautiful thing that God has given us to move about this world. And unfortunately, for people who have eating disorders, they tend to project all of their emotional and spiritual difficulties onto this very innocent body. And the eating disorder becomes a metaphor for how they're actually trying to deal with psychological and existential issues. And so it's helpful to understand that, and to understand that really oftentimes there's some deep, deep things that this person is trying to work out, and their body is kind of taking the hit for that. And there's the soul compromise our psyche, it's our mind, it's our beliefs, attitudes, and eating disorders affect our mind. They affect the way that we think and we see, and there's a lot of distortion around food and weight and self. And so much of the work that we do with people is to help identify what are the distorted beliefs that you're having and how can you reframe them and get you to a healthier place with how you think and feel about yourself. And then finally, our spirit. Our spirit is the essence of who we are. It's where we get our sense of meaning, purpose. It's that which transcends and helps us to connect with the transcendent. And this is the part of eating disorder work that I think is really most important in many ways, because it affects our sense of identity and purpose. And for someone with an eating disorder, that can become completely skewed, and their identity can actually become the eating disorder. And they begin to forget who they are. So I think so much of the spiritual work that you have to offer the people that you serve is that ability to reconnect them with their spirit, reconnect them with higher power, get them online to that part of them that's most important. And often when they're able to do that, that we see such increase in improvement in their recovery, because their spirits have gotten back online with their sense of Other.
Great. So we want to help equip you with some warning signs to look for, and then also help you understand the challenges that you might face as you help people on their own recovery journey, or maybe even your own. So there are a lot of different things to look for. Dr. McGee mentioned a little bit about some of the signs and symptoms earlier, but one really important thing to note here is that people of any size and shape can have an eating disorder. It's really easy to think about that picture that's often projected in the media of an emaciated teenager and think, oh, if you don't look like that, surely you don't have an eating disorder. But people in all bodies and all shapes and all sizes can really be struggling with significant eating disorders. And weight changes often are a thing that can be a clue for people. You might see excessive weight gain or weight loss, or often a lot of yo-yoing. And that is sometimes a warning sign that someone is developing an eating disorder or is already full-fledged into one. Oftentimes people with eating disorders are often really preoccupied with their food or others' foods, and they seem to make a lot of judgments, a lot of comparisons. They can't just enjoy what's on their plate. There seems to be a lot of assessing going on, and a lot of ritualistic eating as well can often happen. Sometimes people will start to eat food in secret. They avoid social situations, so they don't want to come to dinner anymore. They don't want to eat with their family. Oh, I already ate today. Oh, I'm going to go eat in my room and study. There's a lot of avoidance and isolation that often happens for people as they're delving into disordered eating. And there are personality shifts as well. People can get really impatient, cranky, isolated. If their plans change for the day, it can throw them into a total loop and really be a trigger for them. And then there, of course, are physical things that happen as well, where people can become lightheaded and dizzy, start to have stomach pains, acid reflux. Their body temperature might change. They might become more sensitive to being cold. And often people who are over-exercising or undernourishing in addition can get injured more frequently. So they might have more muscle strains, get hurt, and oftentimes, even though they're injured, they're still going to push their bodies past their limit, and they're still going to train and go to the gym. And one of the signs we tell people in the community who we work with to look for as well is friends reporting concern. So it's really easy to be in denial about an eating disorder when you have one, or to not want help, or to want to just sort of keep your control on it and keep in your lane. But when people start to come forward and say they're worried, that's often a really big sign that something's disordered and going on as well. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of barriers to treatment. So our society has stigmatized eating disorders and mental health. We're making a lot of progress. This webinar itself is a great example of people shedding light, having these conversations, and helping to educate and equip. But there's still a lot of misunderstandings out there. And I always joke, unless you're sitting next to me on a plane, you might not get educated about eating disorders. So there's a lot of work that we still have left to do together. And one of those reasons is, like we mentioned earlier, as a society, we really, really value thinness in smaller bodies. And that means we've normalized disordered eating. When I went through my own recovery, I struggled for 10 years prior to seeking help. And I had no idea I had an eating disorder because I thought I was normal. I thought, well, this person does this and that person does that too. Clearly, I can't be that bad. But even though it didn't seem like it was so bad, it was still really taking a lot of my life away, and it was really damaging my health severely. And so oftentimes this way our society has normalized disordered eating keeps people from recognizing that they need help or they're sick. It can help them really hide. And of course, there is a lot of hiding and secrecy as well in eating disorders, which can keep people from getting the help they need because they might keep to themselves and no one might really know. One of the other problems too is that treatment is really expensive. And that's why organizations like Rep Recovery exist, because it's estimated that about 10% of people who are diagnosed with an eating disorder get the full range of treatment they need. And Dr. Naguib will talk in a few minutes about the types of treatment and the levels of care that exist. But it takes a village, and it can take a lot of intensive work for people who are working to recovery. And oftentimes it can be really expensive, and there's a lot of insurance that won't cover different pieces, and a lot of cost is associated with recovery. And the good news is, though, that with proper treatment, people can get better. And that is what we're trying to help people to get to. And also, one of the things that can be complicated is people can do great work in a higher level of care when they go seek help in a residential program or hospital. Then they come back to daily life, all the triggers, all the things that can be really difficult to deal with, and that support system's often taken away when they come home. So it's important that we help people in these transitional periods not relapse. And there's a really high incidence of relapse with people with eating disorders, not because they can't get better, but because the system is often experiencing a lot of gaps and can be a little bit broken.
Okay, so we wanted to share with you the levels of care needed. And, you know, in addition to raising awareness and reducing the stigma around eating disorders, I think one of the most valuable things the faith community can do is to create alliances with therapists, physicians, people that you come to trust. Because think about it, when I need a plumber, I call my friends and say, who do you trust? You know, and because my friend trusts this plumber, I will go to this plumber. And the people that we trust the most in our lives are our spiritual leaders and our pastors, our priests, our rabbis. And so, and you guys do so much for our clients, and that we need those alliances. I need you as a clinician, and hopefully we can work together to provide the best care for our clients. So there are different levels of care, and it's dependent upon the needs of the client and where they come when they come into us and how acute their symptoms are. So the most acute obviously would be hospital inpatient care. And this is when a person is severely underweight, maybe their electrolytes, their labs are out of sorts, and they're really needing to restore weight. They're needing a hospital in order to maintain or get them back into medical stability. So inpatient can range anywhere from a day or two to longer, depending on what it needs to get them medically secure and psychiatrically stable. And sometimes that starts off with an ER visit. You know, they come to you and you sense they're in crisis, and they go to an ER, and from there, or a more traditional inpatient eating disorder facility that's really going to address the eating disorder. The next level of care, which is also very common for eating disorder clients, is residential. And that's when they're more medically stable, but they're needing a longer term support. They're not able to manage food on their own. They're not able to manage the stresses of life, or even the normal daily activities of life, like working, caring for themselves and others. And so a residential environment is one of the most supportive environments, because it, number one, gets them back to health, but then with the supportive environment of nutritionists and doctors and therapists and other people who are struggling with eating disorders for support. And it really kind of teaches them how to do life again. And the whole goal is to prepare them to go back into their environment and to be able to be successful. A lower level of care is called partial. It's usually partial inpatient or partial outpatient. Sometimes there's a combination of those two. But it's when the person may need more than just seeing a therapist once a week or twice a week. And they may need more of a day approach, where they might go from 8 to 5 in a day for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but are still going home at night. So usually point of contact is a therapist or a pastor or someone that they trust. And then that person sending them to someone to get an assessment of this level of care. So you don't need to know what level of care they need. You can leave that to the professionals. But if you can have some great alliances with some professionals that you trust, then they can assess the level of care and then get them to that next level of care.
So how can we effectively engage as faith communities and also just community leaders? It's really important to notice that we can say things that can be really helpful, and we can also do unintended harm occasionally when we don't truly understand an issue. So one story I often tell is we had a client who came to us who was a delightful woman, and she started to realize that she was struggling with an eating disorder, and she had a pastor that she was close with at her church. And she went to the pastor and sort of said, listen, I'm struggling with these behaviors. What do I do? And this pastor was very well-intentioned, cared for her deeply, but sort of his first response to her was, okay, well, we'll just consider this your sin issue like anything else, and we'll just pray together and repent and move forward. And that was really damaging for her, because she already felt shame. She felt really unsteady and unsure about kind of seeking help and coming forward. And that just sort of toppled more shame onto her that, oh, okay, this is just a sin issue. This isn't a moral failing, and it's really my fault. And it sort of put her into a tailspin for a while until she came to us to get more help and clinical support. So just remember, we don't need to equate this with moral failing. This is not something that someone chooses. It often can have really destructive behavior, but it's important to keep that shame piece separate. A lot of times in our communities and in our world, we place emphasis on weight and food and the size of people's bodies. We're often really quick to compliment people on weight loss and sort of turn our head at weight gain. And it's really important we just don't make those comments. We don't say anything when people have changes. Oftentimes we had people say they got great compliments when they lost weight, but they were battling cancer. And so people were saying, what are you doing? You look great. And they were the sickest they'd ever been, and they were getting these compliments. Or people who are in the throes of an eating disorder getting complimented for their bodies, but they're not fueling them, they're not treating them well. And it can be really damaging to try to untangle those beliefs and those affirmations that we get in our daily world. And one thing that can also be really damaging is that denying the importance of medication or clinical intervention. We deeply value spirituality and faith and think it's critical to people in their recovery process. Yet we also need to treat the whole person, like Dr. Nagy was mentioning earlier. We need to help people refeed, get the medication if it's important for their chemistry, and also get them the clinical experts that they need. Some things we've seen do beautifully and help significantly with our clients is being creative and finding ways to fast that don't include food. So across faith traditions, we're often including or abstaining from food for certain reasons. And we actually served a woman who was a part of a religious order and had gone on to be a nun. And her priest was aware of her disorder, and she went to him for some spiritual direction before Lent started, where you typically fast. And he said, you know what? Your fast is going to be 3 meals and 2 snacks every day. And let's think of something else that you can abstain from. It could be social media. It could be certain things that maybe you don't do. One year for Lent, I gave up the snooze button, most spiritual Lent of my life. So there's different ways that we can really abstain from things and still have that spiritual mindfulness. And faith leaders are often able to help people as they might navigate what that looks like for them amidst their faith tradition. And really overall, when people come to you and they're hurting and they do that disclosure and do the brave thing of saying, listen, I'm in a hard place, I need some help, we want to take the empathy and person first approach. So just saying, I care for you, I'm here for you, let's figure this out, is really one of the most helpful things that we can do. And as a faith leader or as a community leader, you can be willing, and even as a parent or a friend, you can be willing to be a part of that team. While you engage clinicians and engage experts, you also can help with accountability, help with support, help with prayer, and help with those pieces that people need. And if the people you're supporting are adolescents in particular, it's imperative to engage the family appropriately. But either way, we want to pull in all the support systems we can as we're helping people overcome their struggles.
Okay, so to share with you some of the goals for full recovery, what does recovery really look like? And that's such an important number one task that we have with the people who come for help, to help, number one, help them understand that absolutely full recovery is possible, and that we will guide you and be with you every step of the way, and that we will meet you where you're at. So you might not be there now, but we can help you get there. So there's a couple of tasks and goals of full recovery. The first one is effective coping. So no longer using the eating disorder as a way to cope with emotions or struggles, but to learn actually healthy skills that actually are effective. Food isn't exactly effective. It might work in the temporary, but it doesn't actually help them have better self-esteem, better ways to relate to others, better views of themselves. So helping them, number one, tolerate normal eating, which looks like being spontaneous with food, the way you might be in any given day, given the situations that you're in. Not participating in purging, restricting, binging eating, or what we would call eating disorder-like behaviors. And then really recognizing the signs of when their thoughts are distorted, and help them to reframe those thoughts and to seek appropriate help when they're struggling. So There are people who are in active recovery that may struggle on any given day because of stressors in their life, but they're able to identify, oh, I'm starting to have those thoughts that I have when I'm in my eating disorder mode, and so I'm going to reach out for help. So recovery often looks like, you never have those thoughts again, but recovery can also look like you have those thoughts from time to time, but you know how to effectively deal with them and they don't take over your life. The second goal of recovery is body acceptance. We often tell people this is the hardest one, that people can be in years of recovery from their eating disorder, but still really struggle to accept their body fully, but it is possible. And so part of that is, number one, maintaining healthy weight, maintaining healthy nutrition, but it is possible that one day you won't obsess about food, you won't obsess about exercise. It's part of recovery when you get to that other side. And it's such a beautiful place to witness in clients when they get to that place where it's just not that important anymore and they re-engage in life and what is important. And then finally, developing a healthy identity. So we talked earlier about body, soul, and spirit, and a sense of self. And so many times when someone's in the throes of their eating disorder, parents or loved ones will say to me, Margaret, I don't understand what happened to Susie, or I don't understand what happened to Joe. She doesn't have the joy in her eyes. She used to be so filled with life. And she does things that we don't understand why she does them. And what I explain to them is, that's not her fully. She's got this eating disorder, and it's oppressive to our spirits. It's oppressive to our essence, and we lose sight of our identity. And so much of the work is helping them regain that healthy sense of self. So, critical for recovery. We need to address, like Christy was saying, the body, and we need to address the psyche and the spirit. Community and family is such a big part of that. Eating disorders don't happen in isolation. They happen in community. And they're not treated in isolation. They're treated in community. And that can often really be hard because initially people with eating disorders often will isolate. So it's about everyone coming around this person, providing support, letting them know they're not alone. I love the image of from the biblical image of Moses and his hands being held up when he could no longer hold his hands up. And in essence, that's what we're doing for people in recovery. We're holding them up when they can't always do that until they're strengthened and able to do that on their own. And so that can look like support groups. That can look like family being involved in treatment as well. Secondly, there's the whole professional aspect of treatment. Eating disorders are complex, and not even all clinicians are trained in eating disorders. So we really encourage people to get treatment from clinicians who are trained in eating disorders. And there's a lot that goes into treatment. There's a lot that we ask of our clients, and that's why they need all that support. So it's going to look like nutritional counseling from a registered dietitian who understands eating disorders. And that's really the foundation. We tell our clients food is medicine when it comes to your eating disorder. It's actually one of the number one things we can help you with. If we can get it will actually help you improve in all the other areas. But until that's stable, it's really hard to progress in the other areas. So nutritional counseling, psychotherapy with a trained eating disorder therapist, and then management from a physician who understands eating disorders. Eating disorders have physiological and biological consequences. There are consequences to throwing up. There are consequences to restricting and not having the nutrition you need. So it's so important for them to be followed by a physician who's going to monitor them and intervene as necessary. Support groups are also part of it. We really encourage clients to be a part of either a free support group like ANID, which is a national organization that provides support groups around the country. That would be something that you could provide, maybe come up with a list of support groups in your area, have that ready and available to hand to your clients. But then faith communities could also provide support groups. So maybe exploring as a faith community what it is that you'd like to be able to offer. Support, love, and referrals. Or you may decide that creating some type of group would be beneficial and something that you'd like to do.
Great. So how do eating disorders affect spirituality, and how can spirituality help and sort of cause some barriers as well? And eating disorders for a lot of our clients sort of can become their identity. It's sort of, I am an anorexic, I am a bulimic. And we don't believe that that is where the story ends. We believe that our identity is made in so much more. As children of God, that is a very different thing. So unfortunately, that can often, the belief in the eating disorder can often block these authentic spiritual experiences that people should be able to have. And oftentimes, similarly, like we mentioned earlier with different fasting, oftentimes people with eating disorders can justify their saying, well, this is just what I do for my faith tradition. This is how I eat. This is how I live. But it can really often be kind of the scapegoat for what's really going on. And unfortunately, we see a lot of our clients who are strong, wonderful people of faith, and they feel a lot of shame and guilt for having an eating disorder. They say, well, if I believe my God is powerful and can do all things, how can I possibly be struggling with this? So sometimes it can make people feel shame and kind of hurt their relationship with God and help them kind of stay silent or hidden or avoid spiritual settings because they feel the shame. But the good news is that spirituality can be deeply healing and deeply helpful for people with eating disorders as well. It can help us figure out who we truly are, whose we truly are, what is our identity, what is our value and purpose. It can help us in moments of distress find peace, to pray, to meditate. And it can really help our symptoms eventually begin to improve as we surrender and walk forward in faith. And also the biggest thing that faith and spirituality can do is sort of put the eating disorder out of a job. As we're working on recovery and the whole person, body, mind, spirit, and we're building these pieces up, at some point, our clients start to realize, oh, I don't need to cope this way anymore. I have a different value. I have a different identity. I'm able to break these cycles and patterns. And it can be really healing and really helpful. And how can you all help? So how can faith communities engage? I see you all as the front lines, no matter what community you're a part of. And even if you're a part of a gym and not necessarily a faith community, you still have so much power and so much opportunity to help people who are struggling with eating disorders. And one of my favorite clients we've ever served, I joke, I'm allowed to have open favorites since I'm not technically a clinician, but one of my favorite clients was this wonderful guy named Tim, who had moved here on a Friday from a different state and happened to go to a church in his local area. He was of the Christian faith, happened to go to a church on Sunday and saw a program that Rock Recovery was running advertised in the bulletin. And he thought, you know, I don't fit the mold for an eating disorder. Surely a straight Christian man couldn't have an eating disorder, but let me come to this course and learn more. And as he came to the course, he realized, wow, I have bulimia. This binging and purging and thing that I've been calling weird food stuff in my head for a while is actually an eating disorder. So he was able to break out of the shame and the isolation. He came to our course, he joined some of our programs, and he's been recovered now for about 4 years. And I love that story because it shows how the faith community can really intervene appropriately. It didn't mean that they had to offer all the tools, they had to have all the answers, have all the expertise, but just opening their doors, having the conversation, talking about mental health, putting it out there in their communication, saying, listen, we know people are struggling with this and we want to support you, is hugely helpful. We've had a lot of people say when their community of faith put it in their weekly newsletter or in their bulletin or however they use their communications, knowing that their place was actually having the conversation and providing a safe place to come to get help made them feel immediately accepted and loved in the midst of their struggle. And so what we can do is create space for these honest conversations. We can host speakers, run courses, support groups on eating disorders and mental health issues. And the other thing we need to remember is we can know our lanes. We can't be all things to all people. We can't be experts at everything. I try so hard, it's just not possible. And so we need to provide outside counsel and bring in outside team members to help. So it could be clinicians, counselors, healing prayer, spiritual direction, whatever that piece might be. It takes a village in recovery. So we need to remember to really bond together. And I've seen different communities really support their people well. We work with a church here who actually has a fund for people who need therapy but can't afford it. And they help sponsor it and they help pay for it so that no one has to go without the care that they need to get better. And it's been such a beautiful thing to see a faith community really rally along their members and provide this incredible support to families and to individuals.
Okay. So someone comes to you, they're struggling. What do you say? What's that initial interaction look like? Or maybe there's someone in your faith community that you're watching and you're worried about them and they seem to be struggling. What do you do? And how do you do it effectively with honor? Um, you don't scare them away. There's actually really simple ways to do that. The first thing is really just to come from a place of your concern. Share your concern, show your concern. It's okay. Don't assume what's happening with that person, but just start with, hey, I'm noticing these things, and be really specific, with the behaviors that you're noticing. And gosh, it makes me concerned, or it makes me sad, and I'm wanting to reach out and just say, is there something we can talk about? I love this quote here. I care about you too much to keep my concerns to myself. It's about you, not your eating, not your weight. Sometimes people come on too forcefully and, you're not eating. Why aren't you eating? Or you've lost weight. And so to help them really see, like, I'm about you. I'm for you. I love you. And I'm concerned for you. And yes, this is what I see. So you're making concern for them first and foremost, and then backing that up with, hey, I'm noticing this and this. What do you think is going on? So kind of putting it back on them to think about and go, well, and to express what they're really thinking and feeling. Secondly, validate, don't challenge them. I see you going through a lot, and I'm worried about the ways you're dealing with it. So in that way, you're validating that what they're feeling and experiencing, but you're also not minimizing that how they may be dealing with it is worrisome to you and maybe destructive to them. And then finally, you can reframe the issue. Oftentimes people in the very beginning stages of their recovery are in denial. They really don't see it. It's not even that they're trying to manipulate, or they don't see it. Like Christy was saying initially, she didn't realize that she was struggling. Or this client of hers who went to this group to learn more and had no idea that this binge purge eating thing. So there's that. But then there's also, even if there's some understanding that there's an issue here and that they need to get help, it's hard. It's hard to take that first step. And we often, we're often the last to take care of ourselves or think that we need what we need. So I love this down here. If you had cancer, would you get help? Then why not for this? Let's get you the best team of specialists, time off of work or school, whatever you need, people to confide in. Who do you trust? So this idea of, if this were any other problem, would you get help? Or what I love to say is, if this was your mother, or if this was your daughter, or if this was your brother, what would you want for them? And that often is super helpful in helping them recognize or be more open to getting help.
Absolutely. Thanks, Margaret. So what can I do? We've covered a lot of these things, and I want to leave some time for questions, so we'll breeze through these. But just being mindful of how you approach food in your community, staying away from weight loss challenges or community-wide diets. We've seen some people do that, and you just don't know what the people in your congregation are struggling with. So it's just better to leave that to the clinical experts. And just be the change. It's okay to talk about mental health and eating disorders from the pulpit and your messages, whatever communications you have. This is a good thing to bring to the light. And just encourage people to get the help and treatment that they need. Point them to safe places. You can train your own clergy or lay people who are in leadership positions to understand what to say or do if someone does confide in them, and help them do the steps they need to do to find recovery. And of course, working with the individuals and families and helping them understand the list of referrals. And Dr. Naguib mentioned this, but one thing I definitely do want to point out is therapists are wonderful, but not all clinicians and therapists are trained in eating disorders. So when someone has an eating disorder, it is critical that we find people who are experts and trained in dealing with them, because it is a very tricky thing to treat, but it can be treated. And so here are some tools and resources we want to leave you with, some hotline numbers, some different websites you can dig through. You're welcome to reach out to myself or to Dr. Naguib with questions, but here's our contact information here. And you'll be getting these slides, like Ben said, so don't worry about writing things down quickly. And then we would love to cover any questions that you have and bring it back to Ben.
Christy, Dr. Naguib, such wonderful content. Thank you so much for covering so much territory and getting through a lot of information that's helped us understand some of these critical issues, as well as how faith and community groups can be involved in this work. We've got a lot of great questions. I'm going to try and go through a couple of them real quick. One question came in related to kind of how you've seen technology affect eating disorders. Are there ways in which you're seeing social media or other strategies kind of shift some of these conversations in important ways for all of us to have an understanding of?
You want to take that, Christy?
I was going to give it to you. Sure.
Okay. Well, it's interesting. There's been some research on things like Facebook and social media. And what they have found is that the more time someone spends on social media, the more they devalue themselves and their self-esteem goes down. And I think part of it is because we present, a persona on social media, and we're creatures of comparison. We can't help but compare and despair sometimes when we see people who seem to be thinner, better, having this better life. And so actually social media has been, we actually discourage, especially early in treatment, the use of social media, because we want to educate our clients first on how are you perceiving it, how you're interpreting it. When you see that picture that's been filtered, how does it make you feel? And so unfortunately, it can be hurtful, but we just need more education so that people are aware of how they consume and use technology. But we have also seen on the opposite side, we've formed Facebook groups of alumni, people who are in recovery, who are using social media to support each other. And that's been wonderful.
I love that point, because sometimes we can always focus on the negative, but there's lots of ways we can take a negative and make it a positive to really bring about healthy change and healthy development. This is a very specific question, but I thought it was helpful for me to think about as well. One person mentioned that they've heard of clinicians actually making eating a requirement for someone, and then kind of made therapy conditional upon that. And I think, Dr. Naguib, you mentioned that food is medicine in this case. Like, what is both for clinicians, should there be a requirement that people eat and be eating or that, and making that therapy conditional upon that? But even as loved ones, should we be challenging those who are struggling with an eating disorder to eat? Or again, how do we as both clinicians and as just normal everyday people, loved ones, friends, social part, how do we help kind of order disordered eating through a social means?
I love that, order disorder meetings. So we'll think about the metaphor, food is medicine. How do you get medicine? You need a prescription. And so they say, this is confusing. We understand that you want to support your loved one right now. First, we're going to get them assessed. We're going to have them meet with a dietitian. We're going to figure out what they need in the early stages, what kind of meal plan they need. And then here's how you can support them with their meal plan. And maybe even before that point, when I sit with that client and they have their meal plan and we're beginning to engage in that, I start with asking them, hey, how can your family, how can your loved ones support you in this meal plan? So the meal plan is a prescription. And so once we have a meal plan, then it's easier for loved ones to support them. And it's more of, often I give people the question, is this choice that I'm making supporting your recovery, or is it supporting your eating disorder? And then I let them leave it up to the client. But depending on how we're going to address the meal plan, we have to decide kind of the involvement of loved ones and then go from there.
I love that point about having a meal plan, because that manages expectations for everybody and has everybody kind of on the same page. Christy, any thoughts about that?
I think our clients who struggle with food often sort of make that the main point. And oftentimes we say eating disorders aren't about the food. It's a deeper issue, yet you have to be refeeding to be able to do the work you need to do spiritually, mentally, emotionally. You need the fuel, you need the work, and it's just not safe. So in different levels of care, we have required clients to have a certain meal plan or a certain weight even, because in some levels, it's just not safe if someone's not really fueling their bodies to be doing certain work.
That's great, thanks. We're going to go a little over with about 2 more questions. So, so everybody who's participating, just know we're going to go a little bit over time. If you have to step off, you can come back and catch this as a part of the recording. Beyond working with clinician, there was a question about someone experiencing eating disorders with overlapping or also diagnosed other mental health conditions, even psychotic conditions, psychosis. Beyond just knowing that we need to work with a clinician no matter what the level of disorder is, and again, acknowledging that there are different levels of expertise, and we need to make sure that whatever treatment someone's receiving is related to the diagnosis that they have. Is there any experience or things to think about for someone who may be experiencing multiple disorders, of which eating disorder is one?
I'll say a quick thing, Dr. Naguib, and pass it on to you. So we often talk about addictions and illnesses as sort of the whack-a-mole. Sometimes if people have co-occurring issues happening, they can do better with their eating and then their substance abuse flares up, or vice versa. So it is something that requires a very targeted approach and a lot of expertise, which Dr. Naguib, I think, definitely has.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up because co-occurrence is high for eating disorders. The 2 most co-occurring illnesses with eating disorders are substance abuse and anxiety disorders. And sometimes it's the chicken and the egg, you know, which came first. And so that's why assessment is so helpful. And then what's going to happen is we're going to do our best to treat those co-occurring things at the same time, and or figure out what we need to address with first. So obviously if someone's psychotic, we need to address their psychotic symptoms first while trying to maintain them nutritionally. But it's always like we decide what needs to be addressed first and work simultaneously as much as possible to treat everything that's happening together.
And looking at levels of severity of those different and managing the most severe condition first and then working back. Yeah, that makes sense.
Correct.
So our last question, it's interesting, we started with technology, but now we're going to come back to social. What are some of the different social and cultural contexts that you guys have seen, Latino, African-American, different things you've seen from different communities that may be helpful for people to understand from their respective faith communities? Certainly faith communities have rich connections to our minority populations and minority communities, so that's important. And as a part of that, if you know of any resources that are available in Spanish to anybody who's participated or specifically looking for Spanish resources.
Nothing comes to mind about the Spanish resources, but we could look into that and that person and maybe talk to some colleagues and see what we can offer to that person. You know, it's not uncommon that issues of diversity come into play when I'm working with someone with an eating disorder. And often it's connected to belonging and fitting in. And here I am in this diverse community or not diverse community, and I feel alone and I feel different. And my culture tells me one thing, and this culture tells me another thing. So it often becomes about issues of identity and personal understanding and acceptance of our cultural identity. So, and then different cultures have different ideals. And so it's so important when we work with someone to understand and be competent in understanding how they see the situation and helping them to address it in that way. But yes, that is often something that can even complicate or just, it's an important factor to take in mind is what's happening in a sense of racial identity. And yeah.
And I think it's really critical to note that eating disorders affect everybody. Unfortunately, no one's immune. There is still a lot of a stereotype that it's this young white woman, and it's just not true. So a lot of people we've worked with in different minority communities have felt shame, like, oh, this isn't something my people normally deal with. And that's even brought a different level for shame of people, where we've had to help them understand, no, this is something everyone struggles with, but different communities have started talking about it more than others, and there's still work to do. But every community has sort of their own things that they value, and it's as you come through, you have to work through that and figure out what you value too.
Well, thank you so much for all of this helpful information. I think I've learned a lot from this, and I know everybody who's in this chat feature is sharing some of this, their excitement too, their appreciation for your presentation, information you've shared and thoughts we have to consider. Christy, if you could advance to that last slide, I want to come back around to this, and our presenters emphasize this multiple times as well. We need to make sure that as faith and community leaders, we're staying in our lane. And so even as a part of this webinar, as you better some of the signs and symptoms that relate to eating disorders, and you better understand bulimia or anorexia or some of these conditions, it's important to you as faith leaders that you don't, as faith and community leaders, we don't have the medical expertise, even from knowing these signs and symptoms, to diagnose someone with an eating disorder. Instead, what we have the opportunity to do is to be aware of some of these conditions, aware of some of these considerations, and then to refer to someone who's a mental health professional for a diagnosis. So this resource comes from the American Psychiatric Association that identifies both observable categories and observable examples that can help you identify signs of mental illness. And so if you, as someone in the community, as a faith leader, if you see someone with any of these examples or categories of activity, it may be a good reason to refer them to a mental health professional. And so importantly, this is just a list of activities, behaviors, things that you might notice. And if someone exhibits any of these signs, it's a good idea to refer them to a mental health professional. Now, that referral is just the first step, and we've talked about how faith and community leaders can walk alongside someone, and that community is such a big part of recovery. And so we want to encourage you to just keep this in mind. We'll provide a link to this in the follow-up webinar, and you can keep this resource on hand as you are connecting and working with people to have it in mind for how you may want to encourage someone to seek mental health treatment. We are so thankful that everyone has taken their time today. We're so thankful for everyone participating. I want to personally thank our presenters, Dr. Naguib and Christy, who joined us today and shared all this helpful information. I'm going to thank each of you for taking time out of your busy day to participate in this webinar. We hope it's helpful. We're excited for people talking about how they're going to share this with their community and maybe even make the webinar available as something they show in their faith community. So it's a great idea and ways we can continue to share this information. This, again, is part of a series of webinars, so we hope you'll join us in July for a webinar on childhood trauma and how trauma can affect individuals across the life course, as well as knowing how faith communities can respond to trauma. And we are just so grateful for this information and these presentations. So thank you for you all. Thank you, our presenters. Thanks you for being with us. We hope you have a good and fruitful rest of your day. Thank you so much.